after this, even though it was quite successful, there were petitions and this, that, and the other thing. And shortly after this, I had a shouting match with the Secretary of Sports at that time. I resigned from the thing. I didn't want to have major battles with the things. So I come back to diving in Sri Lanka. Right, when I came back, there was nobody that I could do any scuba diving with. So I used to spend a lot of time doing skin diving around with two friends, Nimal and Lilindra. This was taken at a survey we were doing somewhere. I forget exactly where, but it doesn't matter. Then, in 1985, I met two people who were responsible for changing my life. The first was Ranjit De Silva, Dr. Ranjit De Silva, who was on a UN assignment to set up a coral ecology unit at the National Aquatic Resources Agency, and his first recruit, Arjun Rajasuriya. So Ranjit wanted to establish a recreational diving club. Two purposes. One was to train the non-diving marine biologists in the country at the time, teach them diving, and secondly, to teach anybody else diving. So this was organized on a free basis, where we shared spare equipment that we had. There were 16 founder members. Ranjit, Professor Mahinda Tilakaratne was professor of chemistry, and we did the original constitution in his office. Tilaka came once to the pool, but we never saw him again, so we were never able to teach him diving. But we used to collect nudibranchs and sponges for him to work on. So David Clark helped us a lot. Indra Jayawardena is in Australia. Taha Arjun, Gihan Jayatilaka was secretary and president of the club sometime. He's no longer with us. And Rohan Gunaratne eventually ended up as a specialist in terrorism. You would have heard him. This is Professor Rohan Gunaratne. Yeah, he was one of our members. Early days snorkeling, we used to have huge parties snorkeling. Benny Keerthasinghe was Ranjit's father-in-law, and we used to stay at his place and go out in Hikkadua. There's Gihan, Arjun, Simone, and Andrew Christopher are no longer in Europe. There's Ranjit. Rohan Rajapaksa and his friend were schoolboys in Ambalangoda, and they had to travel by bus for the 6:30 p.m. training classes at Hotel Ceylon Inns. Go through the class, it went on to about 8:30 or 9, and then travel by bus back to Altakama. Rohan eventually went in as a commercial diver. He went to the Middle East. There were a number who we trained who ended up as commercial divers. 1990, I started studying marine stingers, jellyfish, hydroids. We published them, and the main reason for doing that was that formed the basis of my presidential address to the SLMA, Some Hazards of Diving, where I also talked about decompression sickness. First day for jellyfish stings came up, and I did a chapter on decompression sickness for this handbook for doctors for the Faculty of Medicine. So early pipe wreck dives from Galle Harbour, we came up with a lot of these broken bits and pieces that some of us preserved, and eventually, as I said, took to the UK and Holland to have them identified. This was a major find as far as I was concerned, the Dutch clay pipe, which set me off on a big clay pipe hunt in later years. We also dived the Rangoon about 2 weeks after it had been found, where it was spilling ceramics from one side. But by the time we got there, most of the complete plates and dishes had been taken away, and we were left with these broken pieces. On a subsequent dive, we were able to remove about 6 or 7 of the portholes that were there. Not ethical, I'm sure Jens will tell me. Yes, but if we had not done it, somebody else would have done it, and it would have ended up in a smelting. So anyway, this is probably the only porthole that is still around and available for inspection, and might eventually, I hope, end up in the Maritime Museum, because I don't think any of my relatives are going to be very enamored in hanging on to this. It's nailed to a wall in my house. Some of you have seen it. And it also featured in Darshana's book, The Ghosts. These are some other interesting finds, both these on the same day, the same dive, at what we call the pipe wreck, in 7 meters of water, just sitting on the sand. So I didn't know what they were, but they were both identified by Cedric Martinstein. I took that to the British Museum, where it was identified as genuine 13th century. And I took a photograph of this, where it was identified by Don Vanderhorst at the Skipvaart Museum. We talked about these. Gihan, I, and Commander Somasri Devendra talked about these, and that's what eventually led to the discipline of maritime archaeology taking off. Early club dives, very much a shoestring affair. The portable compressor belonged to Dr. Ranjit. It resided in my house, and every Saturday, 4 or 5 used to come, and we used to fill cylinders on the Saturday for the Sunday morning dive. And we took this to Browns Beach. We used to stay at the Browns Beach Hotel. That does not exist any longer because it was washed away by the tsunami. Low budget diving, yeah. We used to stop for curd at Kantale on the way to Trincomalee. It was always there. Eating in Kades, of course, requires its own technique and its own customs. You have to know what is there to wash your hands in and what is there to drink the same cup. So it was quite an experience. Diving with the Nara trip with Arjan, it was all Kades, no hotels and things like that. Then in the 6th October 1993, some of the old Thomians in the club promoted the establishment of the St. Thomas's College Club. And the major project that we did with funding from the UNDP was a marine biodiversity project. We did a lot of work on it, including the first thing that we did was to draw this map of the thing. This was a scale. We measured and triangulated all these. So the boys, 10 minutes more. The boys, we taught the boys, but unfortunately most of them were in the arts rather than in science. So it was very difficult for them to understand these things. We did reef profiles. And then, of course, we had trouble in '98. The STC broke away and left us adrift. Reorganization in 2004 was unsuccessful, but we had a success in 2007. And the club has been operating unbroken since 2007. We had a few setbacks. We tried to establish a conservation group, but that didn't work. Mull area, but this is the Kalaniganga. The person, Lakshman, who owned the land here, suggested that we drive there because this was an area where there were wars, battles between with the Dutch and the Portuguese and the British and the Sri Lankan. And he thought there might be some old artifacts in there. Let's go and have a look. And lo and behold, yes, we did find a cannonball, a Dutch gin bottle. We knew what that was because we had found bits of this in the Galle Harbour, which I had identified, and this beautiful wine bottle, which I think is of British origin. Nothing that we could identify as being Portuguese. But a few years later, Samantha Gunasekara heard of a cannon that had been found off Colombo during dredging operations and was hidden in a lighter awaiting smelting. And he was able to get that and send it off to the Trincomalee, to the Department of Archaeology. And I found it lying on the floor at the museum in Trincomalee, where it's still there. And also in Trincomalee are 4 of these beautiful breech loader guns. These 2 were lifted from the Great Passer's wreck. This one in the 1960s, it was kept in a house in Tangalla, which I found, and I measured and drew it. I don't know where it is now. This was also circa 2006 it was found, and